In the charming city of Savannah, Georgia, where the oak trees draped with Spanish moss stood as silent witnesses to the slow rhythm of Southern life, the Thompson family was widely regarded as a pillar of the community. They lived in a stately Victorian house, nestled amidst manicured lawns and cobblestone streets, a symbol of their apparent success and social standing. Mr. Richard Thompson, a 45-year-old high school history teacher, was known for his engaging lectures and approachable demeanor. With a warm smile and a knack for captivating his students, he had earned a reputation as one of the most beloved teachers at Savannah High. Despite his professional acclaim, Richard's personal life was marred by an underlying dissatisfaction. He was married to Laura, a 42-year-old successful real estate agent whose career often took precedence over their home life. Their relationship, once passionate and full of promise, had settled into a routine of polite exchanges and mutual indifference. The distance between them had grown over the years, exacerbated by Laura's frequent absences and social obligations. Laura Thompson, though admired for her professional achievements and impeccable social skills, was increasingly preoccupied with her work and the demands of her social circle. She often left early in the morning for business meetings and returned late in the evening, leaving Richard to navigate the emptiness of their home alone. Their conversations had become perfunctory, their shared moments rare and strained. Richard's growing sense of neglect and isolation was compounded by his sense of stagnation in both his personal and professional life. Lily Rogers, an 18-year-old student at Savannah High, was a bright and ambitious young woman whose dreams of escaping her small-town roots drove her to excel academically. She came from a modest background, with a single mother who worked long hours to provide for them. Lily's desire to succeed was fueled by the hope of earning a scholarship to a prestigious university, a goal that seemed both distant and essential to her future. Lily was a diligent student who often sought extra help and guidance from her teachers. Mr. Thompson, noticing her dedication and potential, became a mentor to her. Their interactions started out innocently, with Lily seeking clarification on historical topics and Mr. Thompson providing thoughtful insights. However, as time went on, their conversations began to take on a more personal tone. Lily's growing admiration for Mr. Thompson's intellect and kindness was evident in her interactions with him. She admired his ability to make history come alive, a stark contrast to the mundane reality of her everyday life. Richard, in turn, found Lily's enthusiasm and earnestness a refreshing change from the monotony of his routine. He began to look forward to their meetings, enjoying the attention and the feeling of being valued. The catalyst that would unravel the seemingly perfect facade of the Thompsons' life appeared in the form of Jason Lee, a new student who joined Savannah High in the middle of the semester. Jason, a perceptive and outspoken young man with a knack for observing and questioning, quickly became known for his curiosity and sharp intellect. His arrival disrupted the established dynamics within the school and piqued the interest of many students, including Lily. Jason's inquisitive nature led him to notice the subtle yet noticeable interaction between Mr. Thompson and Lily. He observed their private conversations and the way Mr. Thompson seemed to favor Lily, which struck him as unusual. Intrigued and somewhat suspicious, Jason began to keep a closer eye on their relationship, noting the frequent one-on-one meetings and the almost conspiratorial tone that seemed to pervade their interactions. One afternoon, as Jason was leaving the library, he happened to overhear a conversation between Lily and Mr. Thompson in an empty classroom. The door was slightly ajar, and Jason caught snippets of their discussion. He could hear Lily's voice, tinged with anxiety, and Mr. Thompson's reassuring yet overly familiar responses. While the exact nature of their conversation was unclear, the tone and the secrecy of their exchange left Jason unsettled. The disruption caused by Jason's presence and his growing curiosity created a ripple effect. Lily, feeling increasingly scrutinized, became more cautious about her interactions with Mr. Thompson. She tried to maintain a semblance of normalcy, but the strain was evident in her demeanor. Mr. Thompson, sensing the change in Lily's behavior and the increasing tension, became more anxious about the possibility of their affair being discovered. The combination of Richard's dissatisfaction, Lily's growing dependence on him, and Jason's probing presence set the stage for a dramatic unraveling of their lives. The seemingly perfect world of the Thompsons and Lily was beginning to fray at the edges, revealing hidden discontent and unspoken desires that would soon lead to disastrous consequences. In the days that followed, the tension between Mr. Thompson and Lily grew palpable, marked by furtive glances and strained conversations. Jason's suspicions and observations only heightened the atmosphere of secrecy and unease. As the facade of their idyllic lives began to crumble, the characters were drawn into a web of deceit and intrigue, setting the stage for the dramatic events that were about to unfold. This chapter laid the groundwork for the ensuing conflict, introducing the key players and their underlying issues while hinting at the forces that would soon disrupt their lives. As the weeks passed, the tension between Mr. Thompson and Lily Rogers intensified, their secret relationship becoming more strained and precarious. What had begun as a seemingly innocent friendship had morphed into a clandestine affair fraught with secrecy and emotional turmoil. Their meetings, once filled with innocent discussions and shared ambitions, had grown increasingly charged with a mix of guilt and desire. Lily's secret struggle. Lily Rogers found herself trapped in a vortex of conflicting emotions. Her admiration for Mr. Thompson, combined with the growing intimacy of their relationship, had begun to overshadow her academic aspirations. She still wanted to escape her small-town life, but the allure of Mr. Thompson's attention had become an all-consuming distraction. The secrecy of their affair weighed heavily on her, leading to frequent bouts of anxiety and sleepless nights. She felt a desperate need to confide in someone but was terrified of the potential fallout. Her best friend, Emma, noticed the changes in Lily's behavior. Lily had become increasingly withdrawn, her once lively demeanor replaced by a preoccupation that was difficult to ignore. Emma sensed that something was deeply wrong, but was met with vague excuses and half-truths whenever she tried to probe further. Lily's attempts to shield her secret only made her more distant, creating a rift between them. Mr. Thompson's paranoia for Mr. Thompson, the growing pressure of maintaining the secret became a constant source of anxiety. His professional and personal lives were beginning to blur, and he was haunted by the fear of exposure. The affair with Lily, while initially a source of excitement, had turned into a source of dread. The lines between his roles as a teacher, husband, and lover became increasingly blurred, leaving him on edge. Mr. Thompson's paranoia escalated when he began to notice that his interactions with Lily were attracting unwanted attention. He became hyper-aware of their public encounters, scrutinizing every glance and every gesture for signs of suspicion. The feeling of being watched was exacerbated by Jason Lee, whose observant nature had not gone unnoticed by Richard. One afternoon, as Mr. Thompson was leaving school, he saw Jason standing near the entrance, seemingly waiting for someone. Richard's heart raced as he tried to maintain his composure. He quickened his pace, hoping to avoid any unnecessary interaction. Unbeknownst to him, Jason had been tracking the pattern of Mr. Thompson's movements, trying to piece together the puzzle of this suspicious behavior. A dangerous rendezvous, the secrecy surrounding Mr. Thompson and Lily's meetings became increasingly challenging to manage. They would meet in secluded locations, such as a local park or the empty staff lounge at school after hours. These encounters were filled with a mix of urgency and passion, their stolen moments together providing a temporary escape from the mounting tension. One evening, they had planned a meeting in a quiet, out-of-the-way cafe. The dim lighting and the soft murmur of other patrons provided a semblance of privacy. However, their plans were disrupted when Lily arrived early and noticed Jason seated at a nearby table. Panic surged through her as she realized the possibility of being seen. She hurried to Mr. Thompson's side, her voice trembling as she relayed the situation. Mr. Thompson, sensing Lily's distress, attempted to maintain a calm facade. They quickly shifted to a secluded corner, doing their best to avoid any further scrutiny. Jason, unaware of the full extent of their relationship, continued to observe from his seat, his curiosity piqued by their behavior. He noted the urgency in their conversation and the tension that seemed to hang in the air. The confrontation, the growing sense of paranoia, and the fear of being exposed began to affect Mr. Thompson's judgment. One evening, after a particularly intense meeting with Lily, he was approached by Jason in the school parking lot. Jason, having gathered enough evidence to question Mr. Thompson's behavior, confronted him with a series of pointed questions. Jason's confrontation was met with a mix of irritation and defensiveness from Mr. Thompson. Richard, feeling cornered, tried to brush off Jason's inquiries with dismissive answers. However, the encounter left Mr. Thompson shaken. He realized that Jason's persistent questioning and his own increasingly erratic behavior could spell disaster if not handled carefully. A close call. As the weeks wore on, Mr. Thompson's and Lily's interactions became increasingly desperate. They had grown accustomed to their secretive meetings but were becoming increasingly fearful of discovery. The paranoia affected their every move, making them hyper-aware of their surroundings and the potential for someone to uncover their secret. One afternoon, as Lily was leaving school, she was startled to see Emma waiting for her by the entrance. Emma's face was a mixture of concern and suspicion, and Lily's heart sank as she realized that her friend had sensed something was wrong. Emma tried to engage Lily in conversation, but Lily, overwhelmed with guilt and fear, made a hasty excuse and left. The encounter with Emma served as a stark reminder of the fragile nature of their secret. The weight of keeping their affair hidden was becoming increasingly unbearable. Lily's anxiety and Mr. Thompson's paranoia had reached a breaking point, creating a volatile mix of emotions and fears that threatened to unravel their carefully constructed facade. The breaking point, as the pressure mounted, the conflict between Mr. Thompson and Lily reached a boiling point. The strain of maintaining their secret, coupled with the increasing scrutiny from Jason and the tension in Lily's personal relationships, began to take a toll on their interactions. Their once passionate encounters were now tinged with frustration and fear. One evening, after a particularly heated argument, Mr. Thompson and Lily had a confrontation that nearly exposed their affair. Lily, overwhelmed by the weight of their secret, accused Mr. Thompson of manipulating her and ruining her life. Their argument grew louder, attracting the attention of passers-by. They managed to quickly compose themselves, but the close call left them both shaken. The growing tension and the looming threat of exposure created a dangerous atmosphere. The once hidden relationship was now teetering on the edge of discovery, with each encounter fraught with the potential for catastrophic consequences. The carefully maintained facade of their lives was on the verge of collapsing, setting the stage for the dramatic events that would follow. As the chapter drew to a close, the complex web of deceit, jealousy, and paranoia had set the scene for a dramatic climax. The once innocent interactions between Mr. Thompson and Lily had evolved into a high-stakes game of secrecy and deception, with the potential for tragedy looming ever closer. The stakes were higher than ever, and the consequences of their actions were about to come to a head. The pressure on Mr. Thompson and Lily had reached a breaking point. Their clandestine affair, once a source of excitement, had devolved into a source of constant stress and anxiety. The threat of exposure was ever present, and their attempts to maintain the secret had begun to crumble under the weight of their fears and frustrations. The fateful night, one particularly tense evening, Mr. Thompson and Lily arranged to meet in an isolated park on the outskirts of Savannah. The park, known for its secluded corners and minimal foot traffic, had become their refuge, a place where they could momentarily escape from their fears and the prying eyes of others. However, the park was also a place of growing unease, where the shadows seemed to reflect their mounting desperation. As they arrived, the air was thick with tension. Their conversation started with the usual forced calm but quickly spiraled into an argument. Lily was increasingly disillusioned with the relationship and the constant strain of hiding their affair. She had grown weary of the secrecy and the emotional turmoil that came with it. Her frustration was palpable, and her words cut through the air with a sharpness that matched her growing despair. Mr. Thompson, feeling cornered and desperate to maintain control, tried to placate Lily. He was deeply aware of how precarious their situation was and feared that their relationship was on the verge of exposure. The more Lily insisted on ending things, the more aggressive Mr. Thompson became, fueled by a mix of anger, guilt, and panic. Their argument grew louder, echoing through the empty park. The surrounding trees and the distant hum of traffic seemed to amplify their voices. Lily, in a moment of exasperation, accused Mr. Thompson of ruining her life and betraying her trust. Her anger was raw, and her words were laced with hurt and bitterness. The unexpected violence in the heat of the argument, Mr. Thompson's emotional state became increasingly unstable. He was overwhelmed by a surge of emotions: anger, frustration, and a deep-seated fear of losing Lily. As Lily's accusations and demands escalated, Mr. Thompson's control slipped. In a moment of blind rage, he grabbed Lily by the shoulders, shaking her in a futile attempt to silence her. In the midst of their struggle, Lily stumbled backward. She lost her balance and fell awkwardly, hitting her head on a sharp-edged rock that lay hidden in the grass. The impact was immediate and brutal. Lily cried out in pain before falling silent, her body lying motionless on the ground. Mr. Thompson stood over her, his heart pounding, a cold dread settling in as he realized the gravity of what had just happened. The violence had been unintentional, a product of the heated argument and Mr. Thompson's desperate need to control the situation. But the result was undeniable. Lily was severely injured, and the realization of what he had done hit Mr. Thompson with horrifying clarity. He knelt beside her, his hands trembling, trying to assess her condition. Her breathing was shallow and uneven, and the blood seeping from her head wound painted a vivid, distressing picture. The aftermath panic surged through Mr. Thompson. He knew that their affair and the circumstances of the night would be discovered if he didn't act quickly. He made a frantic decision to flee the scene, hoping against hope that he could escape the impending disaster. He looked around one last time, his gaze falling on Lily's lifeless form before running to his car. The drive home was a blur of anxiety and guilt. Mr. Thompson's mind raced with thoughts of what he had done and the consequences he would face. He knew he had to cover his tracks, but the enormity of his actions weighed heavily on him. When he arrived at his house, he was greeted by the emptiness of his home, a stark contrast to the chaos that had unfolded in the park. The investigation the following morning, the serene atmosphere of the park was shattered when a passerby discovered Lily's body. The police were notified and an investigation was launched. The initial reports suggested foul play, and the authorities began to piece together the details of the case. Jason Lee, who had been a witness to some of the interactions between Mr. Thompson and Lily, found himself drawn into the investigation. His observations and suspicions had already alerted him to the nature of their relationship. When he learned of Lily's death, he was shocked but also determined to uncover the truth. The police interviewed several people, including Mr. Thompson, who was careful to maintain his composure. He claimed to have been at home during the time of the incident, but inconsistencies in his alibi soon drew the investigators' attention. They scrutinized his movements, his interactions with Lily, and the nature of their relationship. The truth unfolds as the investigation progressed. Evidence began to surface that implicated Mr. Thompson. Witnesses came forward, including Jason, who provided crucial information about the tension and secrecy surrounding Mr. Thompson and Lily's relationship. The authorities discovered text messages and emails that revealed the intensity of their affair and the strain it had caused. Forensic evidence from the park further confirmed that Mr. Thompson had been present at the scene. The trail of blood and the position of Lily's body indicated a violent struggle. The police pieced together the events of that night, leading to Mr. Thompson's arrest. The trial was a highly publicized affair, drawing significant media attention. The courtroom was filled with a mix of spectators, reporters, and Lily's grieving family. The prosecution presented a compelling case, highlighting the motive, the opportunity, and the evidence that pointed to Mr. Thompson's guilt. Mr. Thompson's defense team argued that the incident had been a tragic accident, the result of a momentary lapse in judgment. They painted him as a man overwhelmed by his emotions and the pressures of his secret life. However, the evidence was damning, and the prosecution's case was built on a solid foundation of facts and testimonies. In his testimony, Mr. Thompson expressed deep remorse for his actions. He described the intense emotional turmoil that had led to the confrontation and the tragic accident that followed. His remorse was palpable, but it did little to mitigate the severity of his actions. The verdict and sentencing. After days of deliberation, the jury reached a verdict. Mr. Thompson was found guilty of manslaughter, a conviction that reflected the court's acknowledgement of the unintentional nature of the violence but also the culpability of his actions. The judge's sentencing was a sobering moment, as Mr. Thompson faced the consequences of his decisions. The courtroom was silent as the judge pronounced the sentence: 20 years in prison, a harsh but fitting punishment for the tragic end to Lily's life.